And we're recording. All right, so welcome to the second of 3 in the Compassion series, Rachel Allen and Sylvia DeSantis. I'm just going to welcome everyone that's on the call now and that will be listening to the recording later. We had a nice amount of people sign up for this session. And Mike, if you can monitor the waiting room, there's people that are trying to get in. I just want to invite people to really explore this idea of self-care is also going deeper into your own inquiry of your inherent worth and value. A lot of us, especially those of us who aren't working right now, there's a lot of value attached to productivity in our culture. And I was really grateful when I met Sylvia this summer. We met at a retreat in New York and we kind of fell in friend love. And it's always refreshing to me to meet a practitioner of holistic medicine that is interested in going deeper than the surface of just like providing tools for relaxation. But those who are doing this work that also have their values rooted in anti-oppression work and wanting to go deeper into that inquiry. So not just to create complacency around contributing to the systems that we live in that oppress and alienate many people, but in this, to lean into these practices is an inquiry into, you know, how can we, what values do we have? What are they rooted in? And how are we caring for ourselves? And how are we extending that out and caring for other beings? So, you know, when I met Sylvia, we just instantly, in the matter of a couple conversations, that became quickly apparent to me that she also shared that value, that you're rooting this work in anti-oppression work, and, you know, seeing that all beings have access to wellness, that all beings can navigate freely and safely in their environment and live in peace with one another. So I'm honored and humbled to be able to be doing this work with her across the great state of Pennsylvania. We're on either end of that state. And I'm going to let her introduce, the topic for our practice for today. And we'll have a meditation, a centering. We'll go into the practice, and then we'll end also with a meditation. All right, Sylvia, I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. You're so dear to me, and in general, you're just really dear. I'm hoping I'll at least get through the third one of these series without crying yet, because this is the second time I've almost cried when you've talked about when we met. I just want to echo what Rachel said. Welcome to everyone. We're glad you're here, whether it's in real time or in real play. We're delighted that you want to join us for these practices. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what we're going to work on today, which is self-care and self-help through reflexology. And then we'll go back into a meditation. So just very briefly, just so you're aware of what we're going to do, because I think it's important that we know what we're doing when we're working on our own bodies and when we're using our own healing power, where that's coming from, the provenance of that modality and these experiences. So just a little bit of history. Reflexology is similar to the Reiki that we did last week and similar to the Shiatsu, which we're going to do next week in part 3 of the series. Reiki is a really gentle energy work modality. It is fairly old, though it was rediscovered in the late 19th century, early 20th century by some doctors. It's a healing art whereby we want to focus moving pressure on different parts of our feet, hands, and ears, which then correspond to different organ systems. And I do have some visuals for you today to help you better understand that, because it can be confusing just in theory if we just talk about it in theory. It does have some older roots, though, and I want to share something with you that I think is absolutely fascinating. This was, let me pull this up for you. This was a piece of, wasn't a cave drawing. It was actually a piece of, I believe, vellum, which is kind of a like an animal hide that's been painted. And can you see this? Can you see the Egyptian print? So this was something that was removed from a tomb I forget when the excavation was. I want to say that was more like early 20th century. Nonetheless, if you look closely, and this predates Cleopatra. This is the earlier ancient Egypt tombs. If you look closely, these gentlemen are working on each other's feet and each other's hands. So the folks, my reflexology teachers and other people in the field and researchers feel very convinced that even though this was all rediscovered in the late 1800s, that this has a very old, very rich provenance that goes back much, much farther, back when we were maybe a little bit more aware of our bodies and a little bit, you know, before the industrial age, when we were a little bit more in tune to what we could and couldn't do to help ourselves. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be doing some, I'll call them reflexology holds. Now, if you were to go to a practitioner, you would probably get reflexology on your feet because that's generally what we do as practitioners. And that's really because the feet have the most points in terms of reflexology, so they can do the most good when we work those points. And we do that through something called thumb walking, which is just a really gentle, non-invasive moving pressure along our body. And so what we're going to do today, since it's a little bit tough for us to get to maybe necessarily our feet, and just to make things a little easier, because remember, we want you to be able to do these healing modalities wherever you are, in the car, between meetings, if you're a healthcare worker, between patients, between clients, 3 minutes in the break room, grabbing a cup of water or a cup of coffee. We want you to be able to use these, even if it gives you just the quickest respite from the anxiety or turmoil sort of churning. So we're going to do ears, hands, and feet. So if you can't get to a place where you can necessarily take off your shoes and socks and get into a seated position and work on your feet, that's okay. You've got your hands. Hopefully, you know, if you've got use, you've got your hands in front of you that you can use, and you've got your ears. So we're going to look at all three spots on the body versus a traditional session, which again would probably be around the feet. So, and just briefly, this is based on zone theory, and that is a theory that suggests that when we bisect the body, starting at the feet vertically, we bisect it up with lines that go straight up the body from the feet. All of those spots in the feet correspond to someplace on the body as we move up the body. And I'm going to just once more share something very briefly with you, again, just so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. And the premise here is that when we do a little bit of pressure, a little bit of moving pressure, fingers, knuckles, sort of depending on how we have been taught how to do reflexology or how we choose to do it to ourselves, that there's a lessening of pain in those corresponding zones. So you can see zone 1 would actually go right up the interior, the medial line of the body, whereas the very last zone out here goes up the outside of the body. And you'll see too, when we start working on this, you'll see too, when we start working on this, how that works in terms of what we're doing on our hands and our ears and our feet, because we'll talk about the corresponding spots and where they fall. So just a little bit of background, just something to keep in mind in case you're interested, and there's plenty out there. If you are more interested, feel free to Google it. You'll see lots of different things on the Ingham method and how zone therapy actually works. So I'm going to hand this back to Rachel, and we're going to begin our actual session now with a really lovely meditation.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, and part of rooting this work in anti-oppression work is naming where things come from. So I appreciated that you brought the context and the history. And coming from my own path of yoga, which again, naming where that comes from, that it was formerly known as the Indus Valley, and is really a practice that is thousands of years old and encompasses a whole philosophy that is in the West largely relegated to the practice that you see in, you know, the physical practice. And really, when we look at yoga, it's the ceasing of the fluctuations of the mind and finding ways to use tools to harness the potential of the mind. So what we're going to focus our meditation, this short meditation at the beginning, a longer one at the end, is paying attention. What are we paying attention to right now? So I'll invite you to pay attention first. Notice your surroundings, where you are. Maybe let your gaze travel around the space you're in. You might have come into the space and, like, if you're like me, been on autopilot and just sat down and maybe not noticed any angle of the sun or any details. So you can bring your awareness, just bringing those into your field of awareness, noticing. And then you can softly focus your gaze or close your eyes. You might bring into your awareness any sounds that are present in your environment. Perhaps sounds you might notice from outside the structure that you're in. Within the structure that you are currently in. And perhaps even any sounds that are available to you in the room. You might notice if you had breakfast or coffee, you might have a lingering of that taste of something in your mouth, or maybe you brushed your teeth, then you can have a lingering awareness of that sense. You might have an awareness of a smell in your space. I just did some smudging, so I can smell sage. You might notice any sense of smell that's available to you. And even with your eyes closed, what are you seeing? What's present in your field of vision? And then noticing your body, noticing the parts of your body that are supported in space and time, feeling the solidity of that support beneath you, inviting a little bit of movement there to really connect the parts of your body that are supported by a chair, the floor. And then we'll bring our awareness to our breath, this indicator of us being alive. Just witnessing the rise and fall of your breath. And then we can bring intention to the breath. And this is pranayama, the fourth limb of yoga, where we engage with the breath and with intention, with the intention of understanding how to use the breath to either calm and ground the central nervous system or to revitalize and energize. So there's lots of different ways to use our breath. It's a tool we always have with us. So for our intents and purposes here, we're going to invite the breath to be, and invite a full breath, a deep breath, and we'll invite ourselves to slow this breath down. So preferably we do this in and out through the nose. So if that's available, bringing that breath in on your next available inhale through the nose. And slowly letting the breath release on the exhale, out through the nose. And the next breath arises, bringing a little bit more air in. And exhale, letting everything release. And you can invite expansion on the inhale, invite it in. Say, expansion, come on in. And you can invite release on the exhale, letting go. And paying attention to what the breath feels like when it enters your body. You might notice the temperature of the breath. You might notice what it feels like to release, where you feel that release in your body. And so this is what we pay attention to in our practice, to sensation. This is what's called the fifth limb of yoga, which is pratyahara. It's also in the language of neuroscience, having that awareness of the felt sense in the body is called interoception. So we can pay attention to this felt sense in the body and get out of the perhaps narrative of the mind. And just noticing what's present in our body and noticing where we might need support. Do we need to be calm? Do we need to be revitalized? So having this awareness, cultivating this awareness, so we can be supporting our life force energy. So we'll take another deep breath in together and an exhale. And if you like, if you want to rub your hands together to move out of this contemplative and into the space of being able to receive from Sylvia, and open your eyes if they're closed. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, we're going to begin. We're first going to start with some really simple basic ear reflexology that absolutely anyone can do anywhere. And I just want to keep underscoring that these healing abilities are always yours to use, regardless of who you are or where you are or how skilled you think you are or not. This is just you working with your own body in a very powerful and intimate way. So you can't do this wrong. I like to underscore that too. You can't do it wrong. As long as you're being gentle with yourself, there is no wrong. We're going to start with the ears. So in reflexology, there's a premise or a belief that an entire body is encapsulated in the whorls of our ears. I'm going to just show you that very briefly. You may not be familiar with this, but you can see there's an entire little child, little baby within the ears. And what this does in terms of our practice is it lets us, let me move forward here. It lets us recognize that we can actually affect our entire body depending on where we choose to touch or rub on the ear map. So this ear map is a little, it's a little complex because there's a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of organ systems represented, but just generally speaking, you can see here that there's a spine running down the ridge. These are feet. Head is up here. So when we work our ears for reflexology, one of the simplest and best ways, there are a few things we can do. We're going to do what's called a Roman coin rub. And a coin rub is just a really gentle rubbing between your index and your middle and your thumb. And one of the most effective things you can do, this is really great for tension, for headaches. It's nice for panic and anxiety, especially if you're breathing deeply. We want to coin rub our lobes very gently. And you might notice what this feels like. This is not a place where we tend to spend much attention. Unless we have a pain or an injury, there are a lot of places we're going to touch our body today on our hands and our ears where we don't really normally touch unless we've got pain there. So they tend to be a little bit ignored. So you just want to coin rub really gently on your earlobes and breathe a few deep breaths with me. And out. And out. There are many, many different both shiatsu and reflexology points along the ridges of the ear. We're not even going to worry about that today. We're not going to push this for this and that for that. We're going to coin rub the entire segment of our ears from the front all the way to the back, all the way down. You may find a little bit of tenderness. Normally I find that when I am tender or when my clients are tender, that's when some place needs the most attention. So just a really gentle coin rub from the top all the way down to the bottom. This is also, believe it or not, this is also an excellent intervention for trauma and shock. Of course, you want to seek medical assistance if you have had some sort of shock or trauma, but this is a wonderful, excellent intervention because reflexology works on the premise that all of these nerve endings in these extremes are sending messages to our nervous system and our brain and are helping us calm back down and bringing us back into balance. So just really gentle coin rubs. And again, you can do this anywhere, in your car, in the hallway, between a meeting, it doesn't matter. The third spot I'd like to look at on the ear, and I won't use any jargon today. we'll just call it the little flap right here. This also tends to be a little bit sore on people. Some people like to get this pierced, and in that case, you'll want to work around it if yours is pierced. But you want to just do very gentle rubbing pressure. This is considered an anxiety point in shiatsu as well, an anti-anxiety point. So just some very gentle pressure. So we have earlobes, we have the ridge of the ears, and we have our inner ear. Now we're going to take just a couple really nice deep breaths. So in and out with a sigh. And in and let it all go. And one more. In, out with a sigh. Good. Now we're going to look at our hands, our precious hands that we tend to absolutely ignore, even though we use them every minute of every day almost. If they are available to us, we use them constantly, and we never give them any love. I know that. So let's take a look at hands here for a second. Hands also represent, as you can see, different maps to the body and have a lot of different organs corresponding to different places. So you can just take a second and look at this, and I'm happy to provide these slides later if anyone is interested. You can also, like I said, you can Google these and you'll find these kind of all over the place. But you can see that the hands are also mapped out. So there are certain segments and certain sections of the hands, which if we work very gently, we can get a response from the body. Stick with the hands for a second here. Sorry, trying to stop my share, and it's being difficult. Can we see that now? Okay, so yeah. So you can see at the top of the fingers, we've got things that correspond to the top of the head, and then as we move down, it moves down. It actually corresponds with the body as we're moving down. So stomach is mid, bladder and pancreas is down here. Again, there's a lot of different spots in the hands that we can look at very, very specifically if we were going to do this session on someone. Say we were going to do an extended hand session. I don't really want you to worry about that for today, though. We're going to do some very general places that I think just can be very helpful and are very accessible, and again, very easy to do. So I want to show you the map so that you can see all the different possible interventions, but I don't want you to get overwhelmed by it because I know that there's a lot of organ systems on here and it can look overwhelming. So what we're going to do for our own purposes today is we're going to start with some very basic ones. So tension in the temples, tension in the head, headache tension. We're going to work the tips of our fingers. Now remember, reflexology is a moving modality, so it's not like shiatsu, which you'll learn next week. It's not just a press, it's actually a little bit of a coin rub. So we just want to coin rub the tips of our fingers. Be sure to get both hands. And then we can very easily move down. We tend to hold a lot of tension up here in our upper back, our thoracic, our neck. If we just move down right after the first joint and work this area, this is neck. So we want to work essentially the second joint of our fingers. And again, you can get at it from any angle, do a gentle coin rub. And if you're not used to working on your fingers, you might find that they are a little bit sore because we tend to not, again, we don't pay them much attention. And finally, one of the most potent, and poignant spots on our hands is the lung and the heart area. And I mention that not just because we are now in a time of crisis with our lungs, you know, across the world, but because this is just an excellent spot to work in terms of helping us deepen our breath and deepening our heart work. And that is the section right here across the top of our hands. Also pretty easily accessible. And you want to just do a gentle walk across this area. This is thumb walking. It's very gentle. You don't have to press hard. We're really more looking for just consistency. So really gentle. And again, on the other side. So very light, consistent pressure. So we've looked at head up here, neck, second joint, and lungs in here, okay? Now we're just going to take a second to take a breath, big breath in, and a breath out, letting our sigh. And again, in, and out with a sigh. Now we're going to look at the feet. So the feet are, as you would expect, since they're sort of the grandmother of this modality. Again, I don't want you to be overwhelmed by the number of things that you see, but I just want you to be aware of what's available to you and what's going on in your feet when we talk about doing reflexology in the feet. So you see, this is a foot map. It's very similar to the hand map. And you can see again, at the top here, we have neck, again in that mid, sort of what we would consider almost a thoracic section. We have lung, and then and as we move down the feet, so do the organ systems. So I know this is sort of just a very brief spin by, but you can see that it's, you can see the correspondence. It's almost as though someone is standing and you can look at them, their head's up here, the bottom of their body is down here. We've got lower back, hip, knee, ankle, foot down here. So you can see it's a very vertical modality, and that harkens back to the zone theory where according to the theory, we're bisected. So everything on the feet as it moves up corresponds to an organ system. And so we're going to do, if you have your feet available to you right now, feel free to follow along. Again, we can share these slides out so it's a little bit easier for you. But I'm going to do just what I feel like are some of the most common complaints with some of my clients and some of the places that will give you the most powerful impact if you do work them. So we're going to, first of all, look at the adrenal gland. Now you can see here on this map, the adrenal gland is right here. It's not quite inside the arch and it's not quite the middle of the foot. It's towards the medial line and it's right about there on your actual foot. So if you have access to your foot, and I'm not going to lift my foot up to this camera, but if you have access to your foot, what you want to do is use your thumb and just do some really gentle pressure. You can do this one foot at a time, or you can do them both at a time if sitting in that pose is, as Rachel would say, is available to you. I love that language. You can do both, or you can do one, and you just want to hold. This is one of those reflexology spots that's actually not moving pressure. It's really just a light, gentle, steady pressure. And you want to hold that for just about 10 seconds or so and release. And then you can go back and hold it for a few seconds. So let's try that. Let's hold that for just about 10 seconds. and release. And you can actually feel it when you release. And go back again and hold for just about 10 seconds. I would recommend that if you want to work on certain spots, if you're feeling a lot of fatigued or if you're feeling a lot of challenges with anxiety, I think at this time in the world, I don't know anyone whose adrenals aren't at least a little bit tired, to be honest. I don't think this can't hurt. It can only help. So you want to do it a few times, between 3 and 5 rotations, and just for about 10 seconds each time. This is also nice because same with the hands, we don't spend a lot of time paying attention to our feet unless we have a problem or a pain. So it's really nice to give our feet some really nice guided attention for once, I think. The next spot we're going to look at is a spot on top of the foot. And this is something that you won't probably find on a lot of charts, but I find it incredibly useful, both on myself and with my clients. And this helps lymph drainage. Lymph is always fighting. It's struggling against gravity in our bodies to drain. And especially for those of us who wear bras, that makes lymph drainage even more challenging for our bodies to complete efficiently. So this is a way to help that along. You want to start at just the joint between the bones. You're on a tendon, but you want to start just between the two bones of your toes, your big toe and your second toe, and just do a small press starting at the crease of the toe, and then just draw back about an inch, just like you're stroking gently. So you're going to start here, and you're just going to draw back to about here with slow strokes, just a few strokes. This also is a place that tends to be somewhat tender. So if you are finding that there's some tenderness, that's okay. As long as you we don't want pain. Tenderness is okay. Tenderness sometimes indicates, as I said, that a spot actually wants and needs our attention. So you want to do a gentle stroke between the first big toe and second toe. And then you want to move down between the second and third toe. Stroke gently. And then between third and fourth, stroke gently. And then fourth and fifth, stroke gently. Then move to the other foot. So we're going to start on the big toe and stroke gently. Just small movements. Second toe, stroke gently. Third toe, gently. And between the fourth and the fifth, stroke gently. Okay, good. And the final spot I'm going to give you today, because honestly, I could teach this for 2 weeks if I was given the opportunity, and I actually have. But for today's purposes, we're going to do one more that I think is really, really important. This particular spot focuses on throat and tonsil relief. I will admit I am biased to this because I struggled with terrible throat and tonsil issues my entire life until I cut out dairy, because dairy does tend to create a lot of phlegm in our bodies. But this is something that I also see people struggle with. It doesn't even matter the season. People struggle with it in winter because they feel sort of clogged up from dry heat, and people struggle with it in the spring and summer because of allergies. So this is a really, really nice spot. This is, it's on the underside of your foot, obviously, between the big toe and the first toe, and you just want to do some really nice, slow, moving pressure right there. So you're really just doing sort of just a nice, slow moving. You can do a small circular pressure. You can walk your thumb like this a little bit in that area, or just do slow moving pressure, but just some nice, gentle pressure in that area. And again, you might find that this is a little bit tender. These are the 3 spots that on my clients are almost always 100% of the time a little bit uncomfortable for them, a little bit tender. So they tend to be culturally, I think, spots that focus on problems that we tend to have as a group. as Westerners, because we do like dairy and different foods that create some inflammation and some phlegm, and maybe challenge our adrenals. So we want to do that on one foot, and you can just do that for a count of 10 and then switch feet and do it on the other foot. Just really gentle moving pressure in that area. So we looked at on our feet, we looked at the throat and tonsils on the bottom of the foot. We looked at lymph drainage on the top of the foot, and we looked at the adrenal gland, which is right near the arch on the bottom of the foot. And I would recommend, after doing these reflexology movements, even if you do them just for a few minutes, that's fine. You can still get a benefit. Drink a lot of water. It really, really helps to flush your system out. It helps to get those things moving that you've started to get moving out of your system. So we've done ears, hands, and feet, and now we're just going to wrap up before we go back to Rachel with a really nice, big, cleansing breath. So in and out. And one more, in and out. And just give ourselves a second. Just taking a second to appreciate our breath. Thanks.
Just really appreciating this space, this practice, this opportunity to connect. Just letting that land for another breath or two. Inviting again the absolute awe in how we are created. The wisdom and intelligence of our own bodies. Breathing in and out. I'm going to share for our closing meditation, again, as a means of having something that's available, a 3-point practice that can help us navigate through times of uncertainty. And as I mentioned earlier, yoga, the yoga, that the full practice, it's not a class, it's not a series of movements. It's a way of living that we can learn to let go of beliefs and practices that diminish our own inherent worth and value and that of other beings. And we can let go and love. And so in this 3-point practice, I'll invite you, the first point is paying attention to being alive. And we do that simply by just sitting and noticing our breath. Witnessing this indicator of our life force energy, just noticing the breath as it rises, the breath as it falls. We pay attention to being alive by noticing sensation in the body. And in this paying attention to being alive, we can be informed by the past, by ancestors, perhaps known and unknown. We're informed by the present, and we live in a way that honors the next 7 generations and beyond, that they may have abundance. So we pay attention to being alive. We invite an awakening and awareness of our own inherent worth based on the fact that we exist, not because of what we did or didn't do, or our zip code, or anything else that defines us in an identity, but because we exist. Can recognize when we pay attention to being alive, there's a hidden wholeness that abides in all things. So it's something that the beautiful words from the Quaker activist Parker Palmer, this living into that, unwrapping that hidden wholeness, paying attention to being alive. And the second point is committing to the art of staying inspired. This is really important right now. There are so many people that are cynical and reactive, and often I'm one of them. But what we need the visionaries. We need people who aren't afraid to dream and be inspired, even in times of great challenge. And what can you do to commit to the art of staying inspired? What will you intentionally do? Maybe it's going outside and being around nature. That's always a good idea, to be inspired by creation. It could be perhaps be a creative endeavor, learning to bake or doing something that feeds your soul, but committing to that daily, maybe even hourly, committing to the art, because it is an art to stay inspired. It's not Pollyanna spiritual bypass, but it's active practice that, again, links you to your inherent worth and that of all beings. And then the third point is unpacking the illusion of separation. And this is rooted in anti-oppression work. We live in a culture that systems that rank identity, that value productivity and profit over people, that objectify and dehumanize people. And we've all been socialized into this. And so unpacking this illusion of separation, recognizing that we are like the creation that we're in. We're not separate from it. Within our very bones in our body contain minerals that are found within the earth. There are microbes in our gut that can be found in the soil. Like the planet, we are largely made up of water. Like the molten fire of the earth, we have this metabolic system that transforms food into energy and waste. Like the atmospheric gases that encompass the earth, we have our pulmonary system. So we are like the planet. We are created just like the planet. And Sylvia's beautiful illustrations, the idea that within the ear canal contains this whole awareness of the complexity of life. We can see things like the spiral that are found, this efficient pattern of movement that is found throughout the planet. We can be in awe of the way we're created, and we can unpack ranking of identity. We can be informed so our thoughts, words, and actions not only contribute to our own wellness, freedom, and safety, but to that of all beings. So breathing in, feeling the breath enter. Breathing out, feeling the breath release. Noticing your body in space and time, maybe making some small movements. Again, the 3 points: paying attention to being alive, committing to the art of staying inspired, and unpacking the illusion of separation. And we'll take a deep breath in together, rubbing our hands if you like, and exhaling. And another breath in together. And releasing. If your eyes are closed, you're welcome to open them. And again, it is truly humbling to be able to share practices and share, go deeper than just, again, being relaxed, but resourcing ourselves so we can be both courageous and we can invite the vulnerability that needs to be present to be courageous in these times. And, we can resist this call to go back to normalcy, because the normalcy that that our culture has us in is really unhealthy. So these are times where we can really ground and connect to these practices and have them inform and guide us into, you know, a new way of being in our world that is not just about our own individual well-being, but is really rooted in collective well-being. So Sylvia, I'll invite you to maybe say a few words, and then we can invite people to check out if they like. And maybe after Sylvia's done, if Mark, you can stop the recording so we can have people share. They don't necessarily have to be on the recording. But Sylvia, we want to include your closing words on that.
Thanks, Rachel. I think that's really beautiful. I think my agenda with these workshops and with this time that we're sharing, always I come back to just being aware of how powerful we are for ourselves. And I don't mean that in a way that separates us from community. I mean that more in a way of, and I just love the term self-efficacy. We generally, culturally, have not really been taught that we can necessarily help ourselves, even though we love to promote the idea of the lone wolf and strength and courage on our own. And that's all fine. That's all fine. And those things serve us in some ways. But I think one thing that we've not been taught is that we have so much innate healing power and healing ability, and even just the power of touch with another person. And it's my hope that maybe one of those silver linings that will come out of this quarantine, which honestly, I wake up every morning and I have to check in and remind myself we're in a quarantine because it seems so surreal to my mind. And I come from a trauma background, so it seems even more surreal because this isn't what my trauma looks like. Usually my trauma is loud and angry, and this is certainly trauma, and it's not loud or angry. It's very insidious and quiet. But I think it's important, and maybe the silver lining is that we do recognize how much we take the power of touch for granted, and hugs and just gentle touch. And maybe we'll come back around and we'll appreciate those things just a little bit more, both for ourselves and for those in our community and our families as well. So as always, I'm honored to work with you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If anyone has any questions, I'm sorry, I would add, please feel free to email me with any questions. If you have any questions about reflexology or want to know more about it, I would be happy to share that information. There's lots of it out there, and I'm happy to help you vet some of the more legitimate information out there if you want to learn about it.
If you can share the slides with me in like a Google slide format, I can link that to the email that goes out to the participants. And that way the images that you showed on the screen,
Absolutely.
If that's okay, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Mike, if you can stop the recording, and then we'll invite each person if they choose to